Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Austin Estes. I'm with Advance CTE. This webinar today is going to examine trends in state CTE policy from 2017. We're going to be looking at our report that we released in partnership with the Association for Career Technical Education, State Policies Impacting CTE 2017 Year in Review. Just a couple housekeeping rules before we get started. First of all participants have been muted. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask any of today's panelists, please insert those in the Q&A box, and we will have some time set aside at the end of the presentation to address some of those questions. We're also going to be recording today's webinar. So if you would like to revisit the discussion or you'd like to access the slides from today's presentation, they'll be available on our website at careertech.org/webinars, and they will also be available at ACTE's website shortly. For the webinar today, we're going to look at some key findings and policy activity from our report, State Policies Impacting CTE, 2017 Year in Review. We're also going to look at some state policy trends that we've identified over the past 5 years, looking across the 5 different publications of this report. And we're also joined today by a special guest from Arkansas who will talk about some CTE policy developments in her state. I want to quickly introduce our panelists for today. We're joined by Dr. Charisse Childers, State CTE Director from the Arkansas Department of Career Education, Catherine Imperatore from ACTE, and myself, Austin Estes. So it comes as no surprise that CTE is experiencing its moment. For anybody who watched the State of the Union last night, President Trump called for the expansion of vocational schools, and the Democratic response to the State of the Union was hosted at a vocational technical school in Massachusetts. We've also seen over the past year that despite a heated political climate, there's been widespread bipartisan support for career technical education. We've seen this through the House's reauthorization of the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act, which is now sitting with the Senate. And Chairman Alexander's office just last week signaled that reauthorizing Perkins is a priority for this Congress for the coming year. We also saw CTE play an elevated role both through ESSA implementation and through the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. In 2017, 35 states identified career readiness indicators through their federal accountability systems under ESSA, elevating the role that career readiness plays in K-12 education. Additionally, 4 years after WIOA was passed, CTE remains a key partner in sector strategy development, in the establishment of one-stop career centers, and in aligning data, service delivery, and resources. Also in 2017, President Trump announced the Task Force on Apprenticeship Expansion, which is examining strategies to reduce barriers to access for apprenticeships and expand opportunities. Across the states, there are a number of state-led initiatives as well, including New Skills for Youth, which is a JP Morgan Chase funded program with 10 states that are working to establish and expand high-quality career pathways. There's also the National Governors Association's Work-Based Learning Policy Academy, Pathways to Prosperity, and more. So this has been a priority for both federal policymakers and state policymakers. Last week, Advance CTE and ACTE released the 5th edition of our State Policies Impacting CTE report, looking at 2017 policies impacting CTE and career readiness. The report looks at legislation, board rules, executive actions, and more activity across all 50 states and U.S. territories. And as part of our analysis, we code different pieces of legislation and policies by different priority policy areas to identify what the priorities are within each state. Also, now that we have 5 years of data from this report, we can look across the past 5 years to identify some trends in state policies. So overall, 2017 was a pretty big year for career technical education. we saw 49 states and Washington, D.C. passing a total of 241 policies in 2017. To put that into context, states took only 139 actions in 2016, which is still a pretty remarkable number, but this is an increase of more than 100 policies between 2016 and 2017. Clearly, CTE is a priority for state legislatures, governors, and policymakers. Looking across the past 5 years, you can clearly see that the 2017 was remarkable both for the number of states passing CTE-related policies and the number of policies passed. If you look at the right-hand axis on this graph, you can see that 50 states plus, including Washington, D.C., passed policy in 2017. And looking at the left-hand axis, you can see a clear uptick in the number of policies that were passed in recent years. So looking at some of the priorities for states in 2017, we see that these 5 topic areas rose to the top: funding, data reporting and accountability, industry-recognized credentials, dual concurrent enrollment, and articulation in early college, as well as industry partnerships and work-based learning. These are well aligned with what we've seen over the past 5 years and represent more or less the same top 5 policies in each year that this report has been published. Also, the number of states passing policies within each of those categories is on an uptick. In 2017, funding remained the top of the list as it has over the past 5 years. But we also saw that there was a remarkable increase in some of the other policy areas. Specifically looking at data reporting and accountability, the number of states passing policies in that area rose significantly from 2016 to 2017, largely due to state activity around implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act. And this table here includes the total list of policy areas and the number of states passing policies related to each. For those of you that are interested in exploring this further, this table is included in the full report, and you can see a list of summarizing each of the individual policies passed in each state. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Catherine Imperatore from ACTE to share a little bit more about what states are doing within each of these policy areas. Catherine?
Thank you, Austin. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here talking to you today. So what I'd like to do is just to highlight a few examples to illustrate the breadth of policies that we tracked in 2017 within these top 5 categories. So we begin with funding. 44 states enacted some kind of policies related to CTE and career readiness funding. And this is a big bucket that includes a wide variety of different policies that impact programs, students, educators, and even business partners, such as budget allocations, grant programs, scholarship programs, and tax incentives for employers. So there's a lot that's included in this category. So just to highlight a few, in Indiana, policy was passed restructuring funding for CTE programs to incentivize more high-value programs. So this would provide $680 per student per credit for programs that are considered high-value, $400 per student per credit for moderate value programs, and $200 for less than moderate value programs to be determined. And this change is expected to result in an increase of more than 4% increase in CTE funding from the state. Kentucky is an example, one of the states that established an outcomes-based funding model for post-secondary education, including the technical and community colleges. Under this formula, 35% would be distributed based on student outcomes. That includes credentials awarded, particularly in STEM and healthcare fields. 35% of resources would be distributed based on credit hours earned, and another 30% would be distributed to to support campus operations. In Tennessee, there's a Tennessee Reconnect Act created scholarships for adult learners at the community colleges and the colleges of applied technology. This is expected to increase about 10,000 additional part-time students, and about 4,000 additional full-time students would be eligible to receive these awards starting in the fall. Tennessee also, their final budget included a one-time increase of about $16.5 million for college, career, and technical education, and that is to be used for CTE equipment in high schools. And the commissioner announced that the funds for that equipment would be widely allocated to nearly 94% of the school districts in that state. And then finally, in Washington, the budget raised the multiplier for CTE administrator positions by a very large amount. It had been just shy 1.5%, and it'll now be more than 12% for those CTE administrator positions. There was also an increase for positions at skills centers as well. So that will provide additional funding for those CTE directors. There are many other funding policies, and we'll cover some of them when we talk about our other highest categories. So our next most common category was data reporting and or accountability, with 42 states taking some kind of action. And this was largely driven by the Every Student Succeeds Act. 35 states took advantage of new flexibility under ESSA to adopt measures of career readiness in their federal accountability systems. And that included things like industry-recognized credentials, dual enrollment, work-based learning, CTE concentration. It really spanned the spectrum. Other examples in this category related to data sharing between agencies and state longitudinal data systems. So, for instance, Maryland directed its data system to enhance data capabilities for tracking participation in registered apprenticeship. Meanwhile, South Carolina created a state longitudinal data system and also is requiring that school report cards document college and career preparedness of high school graduates. And one example of a policy related to ESSA was North Dakota's ESSA Choice Ready Accountability Framework, as they call it, and that includes a lot of measures related to CTE and career readiness, including students earning a 2.8 GPA or higher in a CTE pathway, demonstrating career-ready practices, completing work-based learning, earning dual credit, and earning a passing score on a technical skill assessment or an industry credential. So our third most common category was industry-recognized credentials, with 39 states taking some policy action. Again, ESSA was an important driver here. About 25 of these states adopted related measures in their federal accountability systems related to industry credentials. In addition, several states made changes to how they validate industry certifications, and state attainment goals were another type of policy that's captured in this category. So Arizona approved a new process to identify and validate industry-recognized credentials that will be measured in the state's federal accountability system. So first, the credentials would be identified by industry advisory committees, examined against a quality rubric, then reviewed by the Arizona Career and Technical Quality Commission, and finally approved by the State Board of Education. So sort of multi-pronged, multi-step approach there. Texas similarly directed the Texas Workforce Commission, the Higher Education Coordinating Board, and the Texas Education Agency to jointly develop and annually review a list of industry certifications that can be earned by high school students. And each agency is also to post this list on their website with supporting information like who awards the certification, the education level required, any associated fees, and the average salary that is associated with that credential. And finally, we see in Vermont an example of a new post-secondary attainment goal of 70% of Vermont adults by 2025. and that would require about 30,000 more Vermonters to earn a post-secondary credential. Okay, in our category of dual concurrent enrollment, articulation, and early college, we saw 38 states taking some kind of policy action. There was some of this was related to ESSA. There were also a number of policies related to expanding early college and dual credit, and also to helping adults earn credentials and post-secondary credit. So Hawaii appropriated $1 million each year of its biennium to expand early college programs. Meanwhile, Maryland established a pilot program to help adult learners earn a high school equivalency diploma, post-secondary credits, and/or an industry credential, with an eye toward scaling that up. And Nevada is requiring all school districts and charter districts to enter into agreements with post-secondary to offer dual credit, and also requiring that students who are completing a workforce development program at a post-secondary institution be able to apply that toward a relevant credential from that institution. So, several examples there. And our fifth most frequently seen category this year was industry partnerships and work-based learning with 36 states. Again, ESSA was a factor here. Many policies this year were related to the work-based learning subset of this category, particularly apprenticeships. And as mentioned, this is another area where some of the funding policy comes back in. We did see several states pass policies providing tax incentives to employers who participate in apprenticeship. So Maryland created passed a pretty comprehensive bill called the More Jobs for Marylanders Act that touched on apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship in several ways. It includes a scholarship program for students who are pursuing workforce training, including through apprenticeship. It also established career readiness performance goals, including registered and youth apprenticeship, and included those tax incentives, a $1,000 tax incentive for employers, and also touched on improving the data system, as I noted back in the data category. In addition, Tennessee directed the Board of Regents to develop curriculum for work-based learning for post-secondary students in the state's Labor Education Alignment Program, and also extended immunity from liability to employers who are providing work-based learning to those College of Applied Technology and community college students, absent willful or gross negligence. And Virginia is going to require community colleges to develop policies and procedures for awarding academic credit for completing a state-approved apprenticeship credential. So that is just really a sampling, and there are other policies that are highlighted in the key takeaway sections of the report. To finish that out. So I wanted to just touch on a few other trends that didn't, some of them that didn't fit neatly into our policy categories. We saw again this year a focus on middle school CTE, expansion either of of CTE programs and/or career guidance and career and academic planning. So for instance, North Carolina established a CTE grade expansion program to extend CTE programs down to grades 6 and 7. Computer science education was another trend that we saw this year, and that continues from the past couple of years to be popular as well. In Virginia, the State Board of Education established statewide computer science standards that are in the process of being implemented, and they also passed another piece of legislation requiring Northern Virginia Community College to contract for computer science training and teacher professional development for the purpose of improving computer science literacy and education. Now, we have one other category. The governance category is one of our policy categories. It didn't get a whole lot of attention this year, but I just wanted to highlight some of the policies did make changes in who has authority over CTE institutions. For instance, Connecticut converted the Connecticut Technical High School system to a separate executive state agency, no longer operated under the State Department of Education. While in Alabama, the community college system, through legislation, will now function as a corporation, similarly to the state's four-year universities, under the governance of the Board of Trustees, and not operate anymore as a separate government agency. So just a couple examples there. So that concludes our section talking about some of our highlights across the report. We'd now like to go into a little bit more depth by hearing from Arkansas. So, Charisse?
Thank you so much, and I'll do a check here to make sure that you can hear me and that the sound is adequate.
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks, Charisse.
Okay. Thank you so much, Austin. I appreciate it. First of all, I'd like to thank Advance CTE and ACTE for giving us as leaders in CTE an opportunity to learn what other states are doing through the reports that they provide to us, and then also the webinars that, like the one that you're participating in today. I especially appreciate this opportunity to highlight some of the things that we're doing in Arkansas, but I will tell you that what we're seeing just in the states that were mentioned earlier today is what we're seeing in Arkansas. I think it is something that we're all experiencing in CTE. It's an increased awareness and support, but along with that comes a lot of change, and that's what I know that we're all trying to stay on top of things, and it's always helpful, just as I'm hearing the things this morning, even though I've looked at the information in the policy report, it's there's always something that catches my attention and that I need to know more about. So I will give you just an overview of some things that we're doing here in Arkansas, and obviously I'm always available later for questions or via email. So I'll get started. So as we look at Arkansas's vision for CTE, it is aligned with our agency's mission, which is to prepare a job-ready, career-bound workforce to meet the needs of Arkansas employers. And through the Department of Career Ed, we're addressing that with 4 divisions: career and technical education, adult education, rehabilitation services, and then in skills development, which is a new office that was created in 2015. In 2017, we had legislation and addressed 9 of the 12 areas that were identified in the report, the State Policies Impacting CTE, the 2017 year in review. So these areas were identified as important CTE areas, and yes, we had a very active year, as most of you did as well. Within our career and technical area, we have established within our agency strategic plan an area specific to career and technical education, spelling out the goals and objectives and the strategies to meet those goals and objectives. So the first area is in the area of CTE frameworks and in our CTE professional development and collaboration. The second is a focus on program improvement, where we're improving and supporting our program development through funding priorities and developing partnerships with our stakeholders. The third is to improve our career and college readiness for secondary CTE students, where we're looking at comprehensive career guidance, and we're also looking at the quality of our work-based learning experiences and internships across the state, and then also focusing on the state or nationally recognized assessment of skills, which I will talk about later. And the fourth area is in support services. We're working to improve our support services for CTE students, ensuring that all of our programs are equally accessible to students, and that we're improving on the quality of our programs in the area of dropout prevention and workforce preparation. So I wanted to give you just an overview of how we're addressing what we're seeing in state and national policy. So going into each of the areas a little bit deeper, looking first at the state policy developments at the K through 12 area, we focused, I'll give you an update on 3 areas: technical skills assessment, student success plans, and then the ESSA accountability plan. The technical skills assessment was part of Senate Bill 423, where we amended provisions in code concerning career and technical education and college and career readiness standards. The law states that our standards for CTE shall incorporate our current frameworks that promote sustainability of our programs of study, and then there were 10 standards, which I will address one of those later. In addition to standards that are part of the 10 standards, valid and reliable technical skills assessments were updated to align with demand-driven programs. In the past, we utilized end-of-course exams to assess knowledge and skills attainment, but now we are using technical skills assessments to provide an evaluation of students' knowledge and skills in a program of study. The technical skills assessment is a third-party, industry-recognized assessment based on current industry standards. It measures student attainment of technical skills proficiencies during that CTE program of study. It incorporates performance-based assessment measures that demonstrate the application of knowledge and skills, along with the ability to earn secondary and post-secondary credits and a designation on the student's diploma. And then lastly, it's to be used as a tool to evaluate the programs in a school, and the department will provide technical assistance on career and technical education. The next policy development in K through 12 is in our student success plan. Established in Senate Bill 647, ESSA requires all students beginning in 2018-2019 school year, and I should back up and say through Arkansas's ESSA plan, to develop a student success plan by the end of 8th grade that guides the student along pathways to graduation, and it includes college and career planning components. The Act directs school districts to use information from their plans to prepare for college and career success, including providing supports to increase the attainment of career credentials and certificates. The student success plan is to be updated annually in collaboration with the parents and students, and the Act describes the process for identifying the schools that need support and improvement under ESSA. To talk a little bit more about the ESSA accountability plan, I will just say that it includes the ACTE work keys, concurrent enrollment, and then to be implemented at a future date, assessment of high-quality career preparation, work-based learning completion, and industry-recognized certifications. The next area that I will cover is in post-secondary education. 3 areas specifically address the need to align our scholarships and also our higher ed funding formula with the needs and demands of business and industry. So the first was the Productivity Index, which was in our House Bill 1209, that directs the Higher Ed Coordinating Board, that's under our Arkansas Department of Higher Education, to design a productivity-based funding formula for state colleges and universities. So this was developed after months of discussion and work, and the board approved a funding model for our state's colleges and universities. Under that formula, post-secondary institutions will be measured based on effectiveness, which is weighted at 80%, and it measures credential attainment, progression, transfer success, and gateway course success. The next area the first area was on effectiveness. The second area is affordability, which is weighted at 20% and includes time to degree, or the length of time it takes a student to earn a credential, and credits at completion, which measures the number of credit hours it takes a student to complete a credential. And then the last area is an adjustment for efficiency. It's collectively rated at plus or minus 2% of the formula. In the future, when the data is available, 2 additional components will be added: non-credit workforce training and post-completion success. The second area that I will discuss in post-secondary education is the Arkansas Future Grant Program. House Bill 1426 established the program to provide last dollar scholarships to help students pursuing an associate degree or certification in STEM fields, including computer science or regional high demand fields. The scholarship recipients are required to receive monthly mentoring, complete at least 15 hours of community service every semester, and commit to working in the state for 3 consecutive years after graduating. The funding was reallocated from 2 grants that were not being effectively distributed or used: the Workforce Improvement Grant and the Higher Education Opportunity Grant. The third challenge scholarship is the Arkansas Workforce Challenge Scholarship. This is an extension of our lottery scholarship, which is the Arkansas Academic Challenge. Senate Bill 528 established this scholarship to distribute excess lottery proceeds up to $800 per academic year to cover tuition, textbooks, and equipment for Arkansas residents pursuing an associate degree or certificate in selected programs in industry, healthcare, or information technology. The rules and regulations are being promulgated by the Arkansas Department of Higher Education. The next slide points out the state policy developments in workforce education and training. Workforce Development Centers is the first area that I will discuss, and I just noted that this is in no relation to the WIOA or Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, workforce boards, or centers. This was created in legislation under Senate Bill 288, and it created Workforce Development Center authorities, including school districts, vocational technical schools, and cities and counties for the purposes of providing vocational and technical education. The centers would be a public corporation with 4 or more sponsors, including those entities that I just identified. The bill authorizes the authority to receive public funds, grants, gifts, proceeds by the issuance of bonds, promissory notes, tuition, fees, and other amounts assessed on individuals or employers receiving services from this center. The bill would permit a city or county to dedicate local tax revenue to the benefit of the authority, and the city or county could levy an additional sales and use tax to benefit an authority with the rate not to exceed 0.5%. The authority would be exempt from property taxes and taxes on any income. In Arkansas, we have secondary centers that may or may not be located on our high school campus. Some of these, or most of these, are operated through our 2-year college system and our technical institute. This is a way for workforce centers to be created through a partnership with all of these entities and has bond authority. And that would be used to provide funding for the center. The second area in workforce education and training is the Task Force on Workforce Education Excellence, Senate Bill 441. This created the Legislative Task Force on Workforce Education Excellence to research ways to improve and align CTE and workforce development programs for greater economic impact. The task force is directed to submit a preliminary report of activities, findings, and recommendations to the governor and to the legislature in February, which they are working on now, with a final report due by September of 2018. The work of this group will help guide our CTE programs and workforce development programs in Arkansas to be better aligned and to make sure that we are utilizing the resources that we have to address the needs of our business and industry. The last area is the apprenticeship tax credit. Senate Bill 505 merged two existing tax credits, the state's youth apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs, by expanding eligibility for apprenticeship income tax credit to include individuals at least 16 years of age. Under the program, employers can qualify for the lesser of $2,000 or 10% of the apprentice's annual salary. The Act increases the maximum annual credit to $10,000, effective for tax years beginning on or after January 1 of 2018. The rules for that tax credit are also being promulgated. Now I want to jump back just for a minute to college and career readiness. This was something I discussed earlier in the area of the K through 12 initiatives and in the ESSA plan. And the reason I wanted to jump back to this is because this was part of our Senate Bill 423, or Act 554, where we established college and career readiness standards for the Department of Career Education and for the districts that operate under our agency. And I just wanted to focus on this for just a minute, just to show you some of the things that I think you're probably seeing in your state as well, where we're looking at frameworks that promote the sustainability of career and technical education programs of study, and that they include these things: supportive legislation and resources and administrative policies that promote career and technical education development and implementation, our partnerships with our educators, businesses, and communities that also support our career and technical education design and implementation and maintenance, professional development opportunities for administrators and teachers, again, fostering that development, design, and implementation of high-quality career and technical education. And then accountability and evaluation systems and design that gather quantitative and qualitative data on both career and technical education components and student outcomes to determine the effectiveness of each program of study. And then lastly, clear content standards that are aligned and integrate our curriculum, that define what the student is expected to know and should be able to do at the end of a sequence of courses. So looking forward in 2018, I've listed some things here that I'm sure that all of you are probably looking at and also addressing within your state. And I just wanted to briefly point out a couple of these. We're all aware that Perkins authorization has been pending for quite some time now, and I know there's been some movement in that area in the Senate, but we hope now that we can move forward and actually reach an agreement within the House and the Senate for Perkins authorization. I know that we're all looking forward to that. We're hoping that it provides us some flexibility within our states to address the areas of greatest need. And so I know that that's something that you're all staying on top of. Then earlier it was mentioned middle school CTE, but we're also looking at elementary and middle school CTE and looking at aligning the frameworks for those courses in elementary and middle school so that they continue on into our junior high, high school, and post-secondary CTE programs. Flex credit is something that I wanted to mention, especially because it started out with our computer science initiative that was created in 2015, legislation that required at least one computer science course to be made available to all students in all schools in Arkansas. The governor has supported this with millions of dollars and also has created a task force to direct the work of the computer science courses. So one thing that we have accomplished through this work is the flex credit opportunity, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but this has provided CTE programs and also courses to be eligible for their computer science credit is eligible for their math and science credit. And of course, there's some stipulations that go along with that, but our computer science credit has allowed us to enter into the conversation where we can substitute the credit in place of our fourth-year math or third-year science. And it's allowed us to begin this discussion in other courses that would also be used as flex credit that are currently just CTE courses but may be able to be utilized to meet the requirements of other courses for high school graduation. We're all looking at new funding models. I'm sure you are as well for your programs to make sure that we have accountability and that our programs are producing the return that we expect them to based on the investment that we're making in our state. Work-based learning obviously is another topic that we're all looking at, and how do we define that and make sure it's high-quality work-based learning. And then CTE education and awareness, which we all realize we have many opportunities to share our success stories, but we're all doing so much that's one of the areas that, at least in Arkansas, we have not shared those stories as much as we would like. So we're looking at an opportunity there to be able to advance our education programs, share our successes, and bring awareness to the importance of CTE education through social media, through a campaign that we're looking at in Arkansas that will enhance our efforts in that area. So I'll go back, let me go back to just this slide before we go to questions. I was asked about what are some of the challenges that we face, and I'll wrap up with this. Obviously, a statewide data system, a longitudinal data system, is very important to making sure that we have data so that we can determine and locate and assess our programs. That is something that we have found to be a challenge. Beyond the work that Dr. Sean Dotery did with the Fordham Institute, we've not been able to develop that system ongoing, and we hope that with current conversations and work, we'll be able to get back on board and have further analysis of our programs in Arkansas. A new electronic system has tightened internal controls, and so we are looking at compliance, obviously, to state regulations and policies, but again, we want to make sure that we are emphasizing the importance of sharing our story. And then funding and access to programs for all districts continues to be a challenge, as some of our schools are not served as well as other schools because of their rural nature and where they're located in the state. So I will wrap up there, and we'll send it back to Sherry or Austin or Catherine to complete the webinar.
Thank you so much, Charisse, for sharing about all of the great work that's going on in Arkansas. It's great to hear about how this work is cross-cutting. It impacts both the secondary system, the post-secondary system, the workforce development system, and all of those new policy developments and strategies are working together to reinforce one another and promote career success for all learners in Arkansas. Just as a quick reminder, if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask any of the panelists today, please submit those through the Q&A box. We've had a couple that have come in throughout the presentation, so I'm going to answer some of those questions now. So one question we had was, what do you see as a motivation behind the different similarities and policies across the states? Were there federal incentives or conversations that influenced states' approaches to policy, or is there something else that we see as a motivation? I can take a quick stab at that, and then Catherine and Charisse, if either of you wants to answer, feel free to jump in. But I think there are three responses I'd give to this question. First of all, we saw a lot of states responding to federal activities. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, ESSA was a big catalyst for a lot of state activity. So we were talking a little bit about how Arizona is developing a new system to review and validate industry-recognized certifications. Part of that work, which was approved by the State Board of Education this year, was designed to support the state's ESSA accountability system, which now, starting in 18-19, I believe, or starting in 17-18, is now going to be measuring industry credential attainment. Another observation is that there are a lot of states that are involved with national initiatives, for example, New Skills for Youth, and are doing a lot of work within each of those initiatives to advance career readiness and to develop new policies related to work-based learning, credentials, career pathway and program study design, and other pieces of the work. And then finally, I would say there are a number of states as well where the governor or other state executives have really stepped up and taken leadership. In 2017, the Education Commission of States did a review of State of the State addresses, and they counted, I believe, 24 governors who mentioned workforce development and career technical education as priorities. And there are a few states, Tennessee is one example, where a lot of the work that was accomplished this year was under the banner of that state's Drive to 55 initiative. In Idaho, Governor Butch Otter called for 2 task forces, one for workforce development and one for higher education, to develop recommendations for improving outcomes for students. And the governor has made some commitments to follow through on some of those recommendations. So CTE is really experiencing a tide of support, and some of that comes from the federal level, some of that is state-led, but it's pretty widespread. Charisse and Catherine, is there anything else that you would add in response?
Austin, I agree that that's right on. This is Catherine Imperatore from ACTE, and I would just reemphasize that I think that the focus, the needs of the accountability needs within the specific pieces of federal legislation like ESSA and WIOA do seem to be a big driver, as well as just the general kind of focus that we've been hearing in the past few years on evidence-based policymaking. I would say that that is a big driver.
Great. Another question that we had come through is when it comes to finding the state-by-state Perkins funding appropriations, current documents only show 2017 estimates. When can we expect them to release the 2017 actuals? I don't know that information offhand, and we'll have to consult our federal policy manager to provide a response to that question. So I saw that came through from Stephen Perkins. I can follow up with you about that question.
Catherine? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Catherine, do you have more?
Oh, I was just going to say that I looked back at the past few years, and it looks like it's usually spring or early summer, although there's a lot of variation. But usually the past few years, it looks like we've gotten the final revised numbers in spring or early summer.
Great, thanks.
Great. So we had a couple questions come in through the private chat. So the first one is, I think for all three of you, but specifically Austin and Catherine, what areas do you feel like states didn't attend to in 2017?
Catherine, do you want to take a stab at that one?
I was just thinking what a good question that is.
That is. So you had mentioned earlier that governance was one area where states, there were a couple states that made some pretty significant changes, but that's usually one of the policy categories that's in the top, and we found that it was a little bit lower in the list this year. So, I mean, I guess
I think it's a category that sort of waxes and wanes. States will make some kind of change in governance, and then it'll be a couple years while it's being implemented, and then it'll be revisited. So that's one that I've noticed sort of waxing and waning over the course of years. There wasn't maybe as much STEM as you might expect. We had 22 states, and that partially is how you count STEM, because sometimes things aren't labeled as STEM and sometimes they are, and so that might be an area that we would expect to see more in this coming year, perhaps.
Yeah, and for just on that note, for the purposes of the report, we kind of have a pretty strict definition of STEM, so we don't include computer science in that category. Unless
the word STEM is explicitly applied to that computer science related policy.
So as a continuation of that, what do you see as the biggest areas of state focus for 2018? Another question that's chatted to us.
I mean, I can say a lot of states made some pretty big policy achievements in 2017 related to their accountability systems, and I think there's some work left to do to improve data quality to ensure that they can meet those, not only report that information in their accountability systems, but also improve and enhance and iterate on those accountability systems moving forward. There were several states, I know Arkansas included, that mapped out a couple indicators that they would like to measure in future years once they develop the capabilities to measure those achievements. So I think that's an area of focus for a lot of states over the next couple years.
And this is Catherine. I think that we'll see more in access and equity. That wasn't a category that we even started measuring until the last couple years, just because we didn't see as much activity. But I think that there's definitely been a spike in the last 2 years, and I would expect to see more policies that are, and those policies specifically relate to making sure that, for instance, disadvantaged students, students from special populations, or students from non-traditional populations are able to access CTE programming and career readiness.
Great. So that's all the questions that we had come through. Again, if anybody has any last-minute questions that they would like to ask any of the panelists, now's the time to submit those. Otherwise, we might just wrap up the webinar and give you back a few minutes of your day. Just as a couple notes in conclusion, first of all, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate you attending. I've included our Twitter handles on this slide if you would like to follow the Department of Career Education in Arkansas or Advance CTE or ACTE. We are always posting new information related to state CTE policies, so it's always a great source of information. And also, immediately following this webinar, you'll receive a short survey. It's about 5 questions. If you could fill that out, that would be really helpful. Helps us improve the quality of our webinars and our virtual content. And finally, if you would like to contact any of us, our contact information is available here. You can also download the report online at careertech.org/resource center. The full URL is available right here as well, and it's also on ACTE's website. We're going to be posting a recording of this webinar along with the slides on our website within the next week, so if you would like to revisit this content, feel free to visit our website. And again, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you to Catherine and Charisse for joining me today, and thank you all very much. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you.